All right, everybody, thank you for making your way back to your seats. We're going to get this show on the road here. Our next speaker is a gentleman I've had the sincere privilege and pleasure of being able to do a bit of traveling with. He is an excellent researcher and sincerely somebody that will bring so much to this event. In fact, he has. If you were here last year and hearing him speak about the enigmatic Göbekli Tepe and so much more, you already know what to expect. Hugh Newman is a world explorer, megalithomaniac. He's the author of several books, including a new one we're going to be hearing about today. And, of course, he's a regular television guest. He's a video producer. He publishes regular films on his worldwide explorations. And he's, of course, the organizer of the annual Megalithomania conferences and tours. In addition to all of that, he co-organizes the Origins Conference in London with Andrew Collins and has spoken at events in the United Kingdom, Malta, France, Peru, Egypt, Bosnia, Cambodia, Java, and, of course, here in North America. Hugh has shared his unique insights into the mysteries of the famous Göbekli Tepe. Today, he will be sharing his insights into a similar mystery and expounding on this, what came before Karahan Tepe. Please make welcome to the stage, Mr. Hugh Newman.
Okay, hello. Hello. Okay, so can you all take your seats, please? We have some serious information to get out to you, very serious. So first up, I want to thank George, Steph, Beckett, and the team behind Cosmic Summit. This is a rare event. This is an amazing event. This is basically the ultimate ancient mysteries conference in all of North America. And I was here last year, and I'm delighted to be back. I'm going to be sharing some very interesting information with you, I hope, all related mostly to today. Probably wondering what I'm talking about, but this today is the summer solstice. And some of the information that's going to come out is from some research and some discoveries that we made at Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, again related to the solstices. And also, we're going to find there's a much more ancient tradition going thousands and thousands of years back, to even with Stonehenge. So this might seem like a pile of old rocks in a field, or it could be Britain's national temple. Whatever you think it is, this is the most visited ancient site in all of Britain. And today, this very morning, just a few hours ago, there were some serious celebrations going on. For about 15 to 20,000 people turned up. And must remember, this is actually right next to where me and JJ live. We live at number 1 Stonehenge Cottages, Stonehenge, near Salisbury in England. And we're missing it because of the Cosmic Summit, but I still love the Cosmic Summit anyway. But we have druids, pagans, we have all these different people turning up to celebrate this time of year. So today, literally today, my sister was there staying at my house, and she took these photos from this very morning. And I want to show you a clip of some of the celebrations at Stonehenge, because I feel it's appropriate to bring Stonehenge to Cosmic Summit this year because of this auspicious moment of the summer solstice and the event taking place today. So I've got a short video for you of some of the celebrations over the last few years, including clips from this morning. So enjoy these, and then we'll get into some more details afterwards.
Very happy solstice to one and all. Thank you.
So it can get a bit crazy at Stonehenge, by the way.
We swear confirming this our sacred vow. So mote it be.
So this is the classic sunrise that takes place towards the northeast, the summer solstice orientation. And for hundreds of years, the Druid revival has brought the whole celebration of Stonehenge back into the public consciousness, even though it's a much older tradition than the Druids who were around about 2,000 years ago. And this is just a drone shot of Stonehenge celebrations. And interestingly, the people in the stones couldn't see the sun, but the drone could, because of the mist that occurs across Salisbury Plain. And so even with Stonehenge, myself and JJ have twice been hand-fasted there. This is a Druidic tradition where you have a knot wrapped around your wrist and you jump over some flowers or a fire traditionally, and it lasts for a year and a day. And we did this in front of 20,000 people, and it was quite intense, to say the least. But it was a beautiful experience, and yeah, something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. And even our photos ended up on Getty Images, of all places, so that was quite a shock. But when it comes to the solstice itself, really we have the classic stone circle and the heel stone, which the sun rises over in the distance. The sun rises up behind this and creates this shadow effect, where it penetrates into the center of the stones. And it's like a play of shadow and light, which only works on the solstice. No other day, no other period does it really work. But this is also a tradition we find in many other sites worldwide. Just a barrow near Stonehenge was a beautiful lozenge was excavated from a mound, and it's got an 80-degree angle on it. And this was a chest plate of a burial of a very tall person found in the Bush Barrow. And interestingly, this was applied to the map of Stonehenge, and it was found that this 80-degree angle perfectly marks the difference between the summer solstice on the top right and the winter solstice on the bottom right. Now, this is something we're going to find more and more, where the angles and the different shaping and geometry within these sites, including sites we're going to find that are thousands of years older, seem to be relevant to the latitude. So here we have a 5, 12, 13 rectangle. This is basically a Pythagorean triangle, or two of them placed upon one another. And this bisects also the summer solstice sunrise alignment. But the interesting thing about each of the lines, the blue lines in that Stonehenge image, mark the different extremes of the moon over the 18.6-year Metonic cycle. And we just witnessed that literally last week at the peak of the most southerly moonrise of that cycle. The last time I witnessed that was 18.6 years ago in Callanish, where the moon, it barely kind of comes up out of the horizon. It rolls almost across the landscape and then sets again. So this is a very, very interesting aspect to these sites, that there's moon, there's sun, and there's geometry, something that my good friend Howard Crowhurst calls the study of astrogeometry. But also, at Stonehenge, but much, much earlier, there was something discovered in 1967, and these were 3 early Mesolithic pits. And these were excavated under the then car park at Stonehenge, about 100 or so meters from where the Stonehenge circle is located. These held giant pine posts, measuring up to 30 feet tall by some accounts, and they were on an east-west alignment. But the problem is, these were dated to 10,000 years old, whereas Stonehenge is no older than 5,000 years at its very earliest phase of construction. So what we have here is a Mesolithic, or very, very ancient, use of Stonehenge. And interestingly, we have the avenue which marks the current summer solstice. It's like a parallel grooves carved out going from Stonehenge past the heel stone and down the hill. And it's thought that this was carved out during the time of Stonehenge around 5,000 years ago. But an excavation in 2008 revealed that large and very deep periglacial fissures running parallel to the much later avenue, which was added later, are fortuitously aligned to the midsummer solstice sunrise and the midwinter sunset. And it's been emphasized by the archaeologists there that there were actually two mounds, one inside the location of where the stones are now, and one down the bottom of the hill at the end of this natural avenue. And these both mark the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset perfectly. So they may well have been measuring the solstice, utilizing natural features in the landscape going back 10,000 years in ancient England. So basically, you can stand down the bottom of the hill at one of the mounds called Newell's Mound and look up to Stonehenge and watch the sun set on the winter solstice. Or you could look down from where the stones were later added, a mound where Stonehenge is now, and look down the hill and watch the sunrise on the summer solstice precisely 10,000 years ago. And not many people are aware of this, so it's a really interesting element to Stonehenge. It's not just the megalithic stone circle, there's other things going on here. We also have a site just down the road, literally, called Blick Mead. And he believes, and this is a Mesolithic site, there's a natural spring there where people would come from all over the country and have massive celebrations 10,000 years ago. And he believes it was like such an important part of the network of Britain that they would have gatherings there on regular occasions, usually around the solstices. So this I find really intriguing because I've been in Blick Mead, I've looked at it, and it's got this mystical, strange energy about it. You get these strange pink algae growing on the stones in the spring itself. And even then, there's evidence with some of the artifacts and the bones and antlers and things like this that have been found that they were treating it like a very spiritual, very significant place. This is something that was echoed by the words of the brilliant professor of history at Bristol University, Ronald Hutton, where he said, in relation mainly to megalithic sites, but this could apply to Blick Mead and the early phase of Stonehenge, midsummer was seen as a time when the normal laws of nature or divinity could be suspended, when spirits and fairies could contact humans, when humans could exceed the usual limitations of the world. And so there are traditions, more traditions aligned to the summer solstice all across the country, pagan Europe especially. Now, not as many as we get at the winter solstice, but there are traditions of lighting beacons on high places all across the country, rolling great haystacks on fire down hills, dancing around fires and things like this, because you're at the peak of the year when more sunlight than any other time of year is coming through and hitting us, each and every one of us. But this is just a short video with no sound, but this is from my friend Howard Crowhurst's films called Megaliths, which I highly recommend. And in this, it's just some really interesting images because watching the sunrise on the two solstices is almost like a pendulum. It's like watching the sun like the end of a pendulum. And obviously on the summer solstice, we have the longest day and the shortest night, which is represented here. And on the winter solstice, December the 21st or thereabouts, we have the shortest day and the longest night. And so this side of things we take for granted, but this is obviously opposite in the southern hemisphere. This is kind of what it looks like if you're looking at the sort of landscape where the sun would rise on the summer solstice on the left to the northeast, the winter solstice to the southeast, and obviously east is where the equinox is. And each time the sun reaches one of these solstice points, it's what's called a standstill. Solstice means the standstill of the sun. So the sun will appear to rise in roughly the same position for about 3, possibly 4 days before it starts rising further, going back towards the eastern part of the horizon. And so this is why it was very significant to these ancient people, because it was like the stopping of the sun. It did things. At the winter solstice, it was seen as the coming back of the light. And even like the whole story of Jesus is really interesting because his supposed birthday is December the 25th. That is the day the sun starts returning and the light starts returning back into the sky as it stays still from the 21st to the 25th. And so there's a lot to think about why the ancients were so obsessed with these times of the year and was making the observations and recording this. It's also an interesting fact, I just blew my mind when I found this out, but the energy from 2 minutes of the sun's rays hitting the Earth can power the planet for a full year. The full energy consumption of the planet is 2 minutes of sunlight hitting the Earth. So that kind of blows your mind when you think about all these fossil fuels and everything else we're doing on the planet. But you can imagine that could also affect us. And that may well be the case because there's something called an electromagnetic energy transfer hitting the Earth, especially peaks around the time of the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. And no doubt this would have an effect on our DNA, an effect on us, possibly spiritually, possibly physically as well. But we must remember also that it's not just Stonehenge where the solstice is celebrated. Right now, in Peru, we have the remarkable celebration of the Inti Raymi, something I've witnessed once back in 2015. This is the traditional festival of the sun of the Inca. And it's the largest, festival in the whole of the southern hemisphere, pretty much. And it lasts for many, many days, dedicated to the sun god Inti. And it was held during their winter solstice, which is the summer solstice to us, like today, basically the few days leading up to today. And it marks the beginning of their year. And it was said traditionally only to be created in the year 1430. But I believe these traditions are probably much, much older. Here's my good friend Andrew Collins, also a well-known author on all things Göbekli Tepe in Egypt and other such things. He was with me in 2015, and here he is in the crowd. I thought it was quite a fun photo during the festivities of the Inti Raymi in Cusco. Now, I'm mentioning him here now because he has been quite a large influence on me. He's a good friend, but he's also been a mentor to me with my research, and he introduced me to this remarkable site all the way down in southeast Turkey called Karahan Tepe. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of this. I'm sure most of you have, I would imagine. But just let's get some perspective here, because this is what Karahan Tepe looked like in, around 2014 up to around 2019 and long before that. And it looks just like a desolate hill. But since 2019, this is in the remote area of the Tek Mountains and is known as Göbekli Tepe's sister site, dating to 9,400 BC. Stuff started really coming to light just a few years ago. And here we go. This is what we were visiting here for many, many times, and we didn't realize what was going to be discovered. Now things have changed. Things look more like this. Now the northern edge of the whole area has been excavated. And as you can see, these are giant enclosures. This one's about over 70 feet wide. There are rock cut features. There are probably at least 30 enclosures they're estimating. There could be many, many more. And this dates back to roughly 6,000 years, maybe even 6,500 years before Stonehenge. Now, the reason we're bringing this in here is because of a discovery myself and J.J. Ainsworth made back in 2021 when we visited on the winter solstice. But first, there was a discovery that Andrew Collins pointed out before we actually went there to look at the site on the winter solstice. There's an area here called Structure AB and Structure AA, or the Pillar Shrine and the Pit Shrine. And you can see what it looks like here. This is just a drone shot made by my friend Dakota Wint. And you can see these are all carved out of bedrock, and they are joined to each other, as well as to the main enclosure D. And there's wells cut into the bedrock. There's T-pillars literally carved out of the bedrock on the right. But if we have a look at AA, structure AA, he found that there was an alignment to the summer solstice sunset. Now this is, just after it was discovered. He looked at all the maps, we worked it all out, and it dates to around the time of 9,000 to 9,400 BC. But what he found interesting is that it wasn't just aligned to the summer solstice sunset. 2 hours after sunset, the Milky Way appears vertical in the sky, which is a pretty impressive phenomena when you think about it. So that inspired us to go and have a look, and we went there on the winter solstice. A whole series of serendipitous events got us to the site. Me getting in trouble, part of it, but basically we had to go to the site first thing in the morning because they were going to cover it up for the winter. So unfortunately, we had to get up really early, and we went to the site, and we got there for sunrise, and something really blew our mind. We couldn't quite believe what we were seeing on the morning of 20th of December 2021. And basically it was this. This is the pillar shrine. There's a huge head that comes out the back. It's about 3 times the size of a human head. Pillars are between 4 and 5 feet tall. They're carved out of bedrock. They look almost like phallic or mushrooms. On the left, you can see a porthole stone carved out of bedrock. Most of it's carved out of bedrock, to be honest with you. And we saw this blade of light hitting the side of this stone head. Now, I didn't really know what was going on. JJ was the one who pointed it out to me, even though I'd been looking at it for 5 minutes. And we realized it was the light of the sunrise on the winter solstice morning was coming through this porthole stone and illuminating the stone head. Now, this really got us because we realized something significant had been built into this site, marking the time of the winter solstice. Yeah, and this is an article. You can actually check this out on grahamhancock.com. We've got a few articles. He's very supportive of this discovery. And this is what it basically looks like. If you actually stand there and watch it and observe it for 45 minutes after sunrise, this light moves around this head, perfectly kind of going across the face and then down into the chin area, almost into the mouth, which is open, which is very interesting. Even the eyes look towards the porthole stone. So if you haven't seen this before, this is quite a lot to take in. I do understand that. But we find this absolutely fascinating. It's a 3D scan I managed to get of the pillar shrine or structure AB, just to show you how odd this place is. I mean, the fact that this is 9,400 BC is fascinating. If this was 2,000 years old, I'd be blown away. This is 9,400 BC, 11,400 years ago. And they were doing this, and they were aligning it precisely to the winter solstice. We went back in 2022 with Andrew Collins and a team from Turkey, and we did some serious kind of scientific as we could research on the archaeoastronomy and the alignments and the sunrises and everything else. And if you watch the head carefully, this is a speeded up time lapse of the sun moving around the head. This is what it does now. But when you go back, and we check this on Stellarium and other computer programs, if you go back in time to 9,400 BC, the light of the head, the light on the head will be slightly higher, and it would completely cover the face up and then go around to the other side. So it works even better when it was constructed. And you can see the alignments here and how it all fits together. This is basically because of the obliquity of the ecliptic. So the sun would have been 1.5 degrees slightly to the right or to the south on the horizon as to where it is today. And this would allow for a better illumination of the head through the porthole stone. So what we're basically seeing here is possibly the oldest solstice alignment on the planet, carved out of bedrock in stone by ancient hunter-gatherers in southeast Turkey. And this is our visit back in 2022 with Andrew and the team. We managed to go there 4 mornings on the run, because if you go from the 21st to the 25th, you get the same alignment. The sun rises in the same spot pretty much. And we even took an opportunity to get engaged there, me and JJ, on the winter solstice, because we'd already been hand-fasted on the summer solstice. Thank you. But one of the debates that comes up with this is the problem of the roof. This is a big debate that's been going on between me, JJ, many other people, archaeologists. They claim there are roofs built over the sites of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. There is literally zero evidence for any roofs on the main enclosures at any of these sites. And so we challenge it, and they've put it out there as fact, these archaeologists, because they don't like the fact we keep finding these astronomical alignments that they didn't discover. And so it gets a bit, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because I think there's an issue here and it needs to be addressed soon, because they're building a new roof for tourists over it now, and that could block the alignment forever. So we're going to show you we're going to set up a campaign actually, and actually going to do something about that. But I wanted to test this hypothesis. If there was a roof on Karahan Tepe, even though I don't believe there was, How would it work? Would the solstice still work? Now, we got a lot of stick for this, even from our colleagues in the alternative history field. So we worked with a guy called Kevin Esslinger, and he's a brilliant graphic 3D artist, and he recreated the entirety of Karahan Tepe, plus he put the sky in from 9,400 BC, based on our research on Stellarium, and was able to determine that the alignment works when the two T-pillars are upright in the center. It also works if you have a wooden frame. It rises between two outer pillars and the central T-pillars and still goes through the hole and hits the head. And you can see that here. And then he put a thatch roof over it based on Pawnee Native American design. And even with basic openings, which they must have had, just one opening of that size perfectly encapsulates the winter solstice sun going through the structure, through the porthole stone, illuminating the stone head. And we were debating this, especially with Matt Simpson. You might know Ancient Architects channel. He's a friend of ours, but we debate a lot of things. And he was working with Kevin as well, because he really believes in the roof hypothesis. We don't. But after he saw all the work by myself and Kevin Esslinger, he said this. And this really made me happy, because he's quite an influential guy, and he kind of now comes around to our winter solstice, discovery. And he said, basically, he sent me some screenshots of the most recent solstice alignments with your adjustments and the Karahan face, and wow. The wooden posts added to the structure don't obstruct it, so it means there could be a compromise. The roof of the enclosure could be more like a football stadium, with the perimeter benches covered, but the middle section open to the elements. This would allow for your solstice alignment and would give a structural explanation for the pillars. So we were quite pleased about that, but there's no evidence either of the pillars being load-bearing. We've had engineers, structural engineers come to the sites and they say they cannot be load-bearing. They would just topple over. So that doesn't make sense. So if you're interested in that, I've written an extensive article. It's uploaded on academia.org and scrib.com. It's going to be in mine and JJ's forthcoming book as well. So you can we go fully into the details, the full reconstruction. There's also an extended video with video graphics of the 3D reconstruction on our YouTube channel. Furthermore, another interesting anomaly turned up, the work of Howard Crowhurst. He's a very good friend of mine. He lives in Brittany, France, studies the Karnak megaliths, and he's very interested in angles and geometries. Now, we saw the angle and the geometry linked with the solstice and the moon movements at Stonehenge, and he found at the exact point of sunrise, before the head gets illuminated, because it has to come up over a slight hill, but at the exact point of sunrise at that time, 9,400 BC, the alignment would be 1.618 to 1 square, which is 31.72 degrees. So basically, the winter solstice sunrise point marks the golden rectangle on the landscape of Karahan Tepe, which is absolutely fascinating to me, because they were working with angles, basic geometries, and solar movements very accurately, and we'll see more examples of this as we go through this talk. Even the face, that's what it looks like through the porthole stone. So you can see this sort of very small area, this slither of light has to get through to hit the stone head. And even the open mouth fascinates me. There's been research on this by other people, JJ as well, that they believe that it's really to do with speaking to the gods or communing with the gods. And the sun, to these people, I believe, was seen as the ultimate god. And so when the sunrise comes through there, that only that time of year, no other time of year, and hits the face and the mouth, this is when the communion between the gods and the people happen. There's also suggestions of a Lunisolr calendar there, and this is the work of Martin Sweatman. He spoke here at the very first Cosmic Summit, and he's spoken at our conference in England, Megalithmania, a couple of times. And he published this, I think, last year. And he did some analysis of not only Göbekli Tepe Pillar 43, which we'll have a quick look at later, JJ talked about it earlier as well, but also Karahan Tepe itself and the pillar shrine where the head and the pillars exist. Fundamentally, I won't go into detail here, but he basically counted the different elements of the sites and worked out that they were studying the movements of the solar year accurately, just by these basic numbers. And he believed that the head, perhaps, or the freestanding pillar is another theory, that it marked the summer solstice, but we believe it marks the winter solstice, and that would have triggered his calendar to begin each year. So this is a basic lunisolar calendar. Other ones have been found at Stonehenge. There's one at Göbekli Tepe we'll look at soon as well. Also, we did some analysis with Archaeoastronomer Rodney Hale and Andrew Collins of where the moon would appear on the summer solstice at Karahan Tepe, because at the opposite side of the year, the moon follows roughly the same path of the sun, depending on where it is in the Metonic 18.6-year cycle. Usually it's the center part of the cycle, which would have been about 7 years ago, or 6 years ago. And basically, at the right summer solstice nighttime, when the moon is rising, because it's the opposite side of the year to the winter solstice, it could be bright enough to illuminate the stone head, because it moves in the same path as the sun on the winter solstice. So there's things like this may have been occurring as well. We also have longer cycles like the Venus cycle, which rises in the same position as the winter solstice, and a few other things happening. There's like the Milky Way being horizontal in the sky during the night on the winter solstice and other such things. Now, I go into this in more detail in other lectures. Last year's lecture, in fact, you can have a look at that on the Cosmic Summit YouTube page, and also on art, we've got many videos on it as well. But this is the new area of discovery. This is literally 3 weeks ago, we were in Turkey, and more has been excavated since we were last there in September. Now, they're working hard to get this site excavated. It's happening quick, and major discoveries are coming out of the ground. Here's a bizarre 3D scan, which I managed to get with my phone. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And this just shows you the new enclosure at the top of the hill, which was first discovered in late 2023. But it's been more heavily excavated since then. Half of it still hasn't even been excavated. And this is going to be as large, if not larger, than the main enclosure at Karahan Tepe below structure AD. And in this, a 7.5-foot tall statue was found holding his phallus, or with it, he's got a fake beard. It looks like an Egyptian beard. He's got a kind of almost a Mohican haircut. He's got ribs showing. JJ talked about this gentleman earlier. And also there was a vulture statue, 2.5 feet tall, found in the northern section of this particular enclosure. So who this guy represents, we don't know, but people have speculated it's the Anunnaki, it's the Watchers, it's the ancient gods. We really don't know, but the fact he's 7.5 feet tall is very interesting to me and Jim Vieira, who are kind of closet giantologists as well. Here's just a 3D scan of this wonderful statue. I mean, Andrew Collins believes they could make this into a Disney, toy, because it looks so kind of sweet. But there was probably pretty dark rituals going on there, in my opinion, so I wouldn't suggest that. This is one of the discoveries. This is the fallen T-pillar, giant T-pillar. They've all been broken or fallen or possibly knocked over in antiquity. But right up there, you get this really strange little bowl with almost like a bow tie kind of carved on it. There are other discoveries. I'm actually publishing a video this weekend on the Megalithomania YouTube channel of all the new discoveries, so look out for that. Maybe I'll post it in the Cosmic Summit group and everything. Here's some of the new areas. At the very back of the main enclosure, on the bottom right there, these huge platforms, almost like steps, benches going up at different levels with T-pillars between them, have been discovered. There's also a niche at the back, which we believe a statue was found in, and they haven't told us what was found there yet. And also, the one on the left there is really interesting. Look, it's a nub on a T-pillar. It's the first one I've seen in the whole region around Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. But also, we have an area down at the bottom of the site called the kitchen. We call it the alchemical kitchen because some Anatolian viper bones were found there. And we know the poison from them can be used as a strong psychedelic. But that's a whole other story. But there are beautiful stone plates, really high-tech plates have been found, and not on the quality of Matt Bell's vases and things like that, but very, very good for its time, 9,400 BC. What is a concern for us? This is a kind of public photo, but Mike Collins, Wandering Wolf, who can't be here this weekend, unfortunately, he sent me this. And this basically shows you where they're creating these big holes in the ground to put a new roof in, which is really, really stressing me out a little bit, to be honest with you. Look, so this is the proposed roof they're going to be building over the site, and they've got walkways, they've got a kind of, it's a movable roof, so they can add to it as they increase the size of the actual kind of site, the excavation. But we believe this is going to block the alignment. Now, the archaeologists have been silent on this winter solstice alignment, and we just don't know why, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we think this is a really important aspect that should be looked at. Whoever discovered it, I think they were angry at us because we discovered it. This is the whole area they're building. This is next to Göbekli Tepe, the other Tepe just next to Karahan Tepe. They're building a big visitor center there. There's massive kind of construction going on. So there's a lot going on at Karahan Tepe now. It's going to be a proper kind of tourist site over the next couple of years. And even if we're going back in September, we're doing another trip there, but we feel the roof may be half up by the time we get there, unfortunately. But this is just one site of many. There are many sites in the whole, what has become known as the Tas-Tepala culture. I call it the Tas-Tepala super civilization because I think there's so many advancements and innovations taking place at all these sites going back to almost 12,000 years ago. And I talked about that last year at Cosmic Summit, so hopefully you saw that talk. If not, again, you can watch it on the stream from last year. And I went into details about each of these. But Göbekli Tepe is clearly the big site. Everyone knows about it. Everyone goes there. I first went there in 2013 AD with Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins. It was my first visit. It was Graham's first visit. I was honored to share that trip with them. This was before any roofs went up there. Massive site. Not much has been excavated, less than 5%, maybe 6% at a push. But these enclosures are like 50 to 60 feet wide, some of them. This is an overhead view of the main area, the Southeast Depression, which is being excavated. But now they think there's up to 23 enclosures at the site through the GPR scan that they did. And you can see that here. And some of them look massive, especially the one in the middle there. So excavation began here way back in 1966, originally partly discovered in 1963. But Enclosure D has really sort of grabbed our attention over the years. And now they've actually excavated more of it. You can actually see the shape of it. You can actually see the geometry of it. And this is something I talked about in depth last year. So because they've now cleared it, you can actually see around the edge there where the pillars are like placed on this curb and the whole floor is carved flat out of the bedrock. So there was a huge amount of labor, and these giant T-pillars, 18 feet tall, anthropomorphic with hands and arms coming down the side, wearing belts, but faceless rectangular heads. So that is a very, very strange place. So this is the geometry we've been determining from it. I'm not going to get into this now. This is last year's talk, but it's obviously in the new book. But also I'm going to be getting more into this over the next few months. But there's a lot going on here. We have extremely advanced geometry going on here, which shouldn't exist at this time, basically. We have metrology going on here as well. Very sophisticated measurement systems. Some of these measurements based on the size and shape of the Earth, suggesting they had an understanding of the size and shape of the Earth, and they were going off to different places and measuring. And we also have a huge amount of alignments between these sites, going across huge distances. Again, I went into detail in this last year. What I want to look at today is what has been discovered recently in Enclosure D. And this is JJ here inside a reconstruction which is in Llanllwrf Museum. It's the main city, it's the sacred city next to Göbekli Tepe, near Karahan Tepe. This is where we always stay when we go there. And this is so you can see the scale of these enclosures. They're pretty massive. Then we have different elements of astronomy have been looked at here. Andrew Collins loves the north. He's focused on like Cygnus and Deneb and the north, going through the porthole stones and other such things. Other researchers look to the south, looking at different elements. Gwiglo Magli, I know Robert has been doing stuff looking towards the southern part of the sky, and it's all valid to me. And because if you saw JJ's talk earlier, she explains how it all fits together through the Golden Gate of the ecliptic. So the symbolism here, just these basic symbols here, which JJ mentioned earlier, like the H is like two people, that could be representing Gemini. You have a solar and a lunar symbol just below it. At the bottom there, you've got 7 flightless birds, which could represent the stars of the Pleiades. And these are the basics of astronomical symbolism, but the archaeologists at the site refuse to accept any of them exist there. So it gets a little bit frustrating the more discoveries are being made. And this just shows you a representation of Andrew's work on the left and Magali's work on the right. Notice the circled orange circle there, that's enclosure F. That is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. We have one enclosure at Göbekli Tepe, clearly related to the solstices. We also have the work of Martin Sweatman once again of Pillar 43. And he basically adds up different elements on Pillar 43 and again worked out a lunisolar calendar. What's also interesting to me is that there's the sun. He said it would be the sun at the winter solstice in 10,950 BC, that this was a kind of image of, like a replica of that particular date, an honoring of that date, which is the Younger Dryas impact era. And so we have that going on there as well, but it's focused around the winter solstice. We also have this is one of the newer discoveries. This is found in the southeast edge of enclosure D, embedded into a wall. And you can see a clear H there. It's got almost like C's on either side. You get this on the belt of the giant pillars as well. But just remember what we saw at Stonehenge. We had the golden breastplate found in Bushbarrow, marking the angles of the solstices, remember, 80 degrees. So at the latitude of Göbekli Tepe, it's a different degrees between the two solstices. And if you take one of the edges of that stone we just looked at and place it in the middle of enclosure D, it perfectly marks to the right-hand side, the top right and bottom right, the summer solstice and the winter solstice if standing in the middle of that particular enclosure. And that stone that I showed you with the H on it is perfectly in the position of the winter solstice sunrise, whereas this stone is in the position of the summer solstice sunrise. And if you're inside the enclosure itself, looking towards that southeast orientation, towards the winter solstice sunrise, you have a clear view of the horizon. And have you noticed the shape you're looking at there? The 2 upright pillars and the horizon going across a big H. And these are the symbols we're finding in the positions of these alignments. And the H itself is very intriguing. I believe this is part of a porthole stone. I believe there's other sections of it have actually been found, and they're in the museum. And I believe there would have been a porthole stone in the area. This is one section of it. It would have continued around, and that would have been where the sun came through precisely on the winter solstice, like it does similarly at Karahan Tepe. And this is the area we're kind of looking at. And interestingly, this was another discovery being made. This is a giant boar statue. It's a life-size boar statue. It had red, white, and black paint on it as well. Found below the porthole stone to the north. Also, a boar jaw was found as well on the floor in enclosure D. And this is often related to the winter solstice. And there's many boars that have been found in enclosure D and across the rest of the site. And interestingly, the boar is related to the winter solstice. The story of Adonis killed by the boar, the sacrifice of the boar at midwinter to avenge the boar's actions, which is the assurance of return of the god of the spring equinox a few months later. And so we have this kind of later tradition relating the boar to the winter solstice, and it's marked within the site as well. And the light coming through would have hit the front edge of Pillar 43 as well, pretty much. And this is something JJ talked more deeply about earlier. But before we move on, you have to meet these two guys, which are usually there at Göbekli Tepe. These are my new friends. You've got to get a couple of cats into a lecture, otherwise it's just not worth listening to, in my opinion. But on the subject of the winter solstice, there are many different ones you can look at. Here's a few here, which you can view while I have a quick drink. So the winter solstice and the summer solstice are interrelated. The summer solstice sunrise The opposite direction is the winter solstice sunset, the winter solstice sunrise, summer solstice sunset. They cross like a cross through the kind of landscape where these are placed. Chaco Canyon's a very interesting one. I'm just going to run through some interesting examples because of the nature, the auspicious day that we're doing this conference and talking about this subject. Chaco Canyon has a winter and a summer solstice blade of light occurrence. This is the winter solstice one, where the two blades of light coming in from these blocks that have been lent against this wall mark the edge of the spiral. Whereas on the summer solstice, just one blade of light goes through the middle of the spiral. So it's almost like a basic rudimentary calendar found at Chaco Canyon, but marking the two solstices. Karnak in Egypt, the whole Holy of Holies at Karnak is aligned to the winter solstice. The sunrise, the whole orientation of the entire temple is. People go there and celebrate that even today. We have Nidra on Malta. There's many sites on Malta that actually align to the solstices, but this one is a particular interest because it's mainly an equinox site, but the opening allows this light to come through, and you can see like the image almost in the middle there with the kind of shaped shape there. That is the winter solstice sunrise. That's what happens on one side. Then the equinox, it goes through the middle, and then the summer solstice lights up the other side. And there would have been statues of goddesses and other such things being illuminated at this time. So these traditions are all over the world, using blades of light to mark these different times of year. We also have it at Hagar Him as well. We have a similar alignment here, very specifically to the winter solstice, this one in fact. Interestingly, these are, according to Leni Ridgick, who's done a brilliant book called Syria, Start of the Maltese Temples, she believes it actually dates back to 9,150 BC because it also marks the rising and setting of Sirius during that era. So these could be contemporary with Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. In fact, here she is herself, Leni Ridgick, here's her book, and here's some of the dates. You might want to get a photo of this. This is kind of a cool little page from her book because she believes that the dates go way, way back, all across the Maltese Islands onto Gozo, Gigantea, Hagar Him, Bujiba and other places, not just the traditional dates which only go back to around 4,000 or 4,200 BC at the earliest. So this is really intriguing work. We met up with her in Malta a few years ago. She came and spoke at our conference. But this is fascinating. I do recommend you get her book. But we also have an alignment, like a ley line, between Gigantea, Sansuna Dolmen, both on Gozo, and Bujiba Temple, one of the oldest temples, according to Leni Ridgick, on the Maltese Islands, where a whole hotel is built around, which is where we stay on our tours, by the way, obviously. And there's an alignment between them, but this is exactly the winter solstice alignment for the date she is talking about, going across the entire landscapes. They weren't just marking it small scale. They were going across whole islands, across the Mediterranean and other places. Here she is again, and the remarkable dating that she's come up with, which she actually appeared on Ancient Apocalypse. You can see her on season 1 on Graham Hancock's show on Netflix as well. So this is Newgrange. This is in Ireland, in the Boyne Valley. This is a famous one for its remarkable winter solstice sunrise alignment. It rises 4 minutes after sunrise. It lasts for 17 minutes. The blade of light goes all the way back to the very back of the chamber. It's like 60 feet, 70 feet down, and illuminates certain imagery carvings on the back. There could well have been statues. The faces could have been illuminated. We just don't know. Beautiful photo here by Anthony Murphy. We also have Bryn Kedley D. This is a site in Anglesey in the north part of Wales. This is an amazing place. This has a summer solstice sunrise alignment. This goes back to at least 3,200 BC. It could be older. Celebrations were taking place there literally today as well. And also it marks geometries through the landscape of 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triangles like we see at other sites related to the solstices. But what's interesting to me is that, very interesting actually, there's a pillar, like an upright standing stone of a completely different type of rock, placed inside the chamber but it doesn't get hit by the light on the summer solstice morning. What's at the back of the chamber, whatever was there could have been statues, there could have been carvings, does get illuminated. And that reminds me very much of the pillar shrine or structure AB in Karahan Tepe, because none of the upright pillars get illuminated. It's almost like they're all in the dark, observing the light coming through. They could almost represent the people, the initiates, observing these magnificent phenomena taking place in ancient times. Just a theory, but I kind of like that one. We have Stony Littleton Longbarrow. This is in Somerset. Beautiful site. This goes back to about 3,800 BC. This is aligned to the the winter solstice sunrise. I've been there myself. It's a remarkable site. This is Gavronis in Carnac, Brittany, on one of the islands off the main megalithic area. Again, this goes back to about 4,000 BC, possibly older. And this has got a stunning alignment where not only does it take in the winter solstice sunrise illumination, it also covers the extreme positions of the moon, which we saw at Stonehenge as well. So you can see that on the image here. The moon goes slightly further south on the horizon during the major southern standstill. This is what's happening literally now as we speak on the planet. And it won't happen again for another 18.61 years. We also have the Crowhurst quadrilateral. This is some research that was done by Howard Crowhurst again. And he found, this is a wonderful megalithic. I've been here on the summer solstice before. I've been over to, he does events on the summer solstice in Brittany, Carnac, Brittany. And he found that the actual shape of that is precisely 30 by 40 by 50 megalithic yards. And now this is a measurement found all across the British Isles, discovered by Alexander Thom. So basically, we have a 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triangle. But what's so fascinating about this totally blew my mind, is that the angles, basically going up to the top right and bottom right, they show the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunrise perfectly. So basically, at this latitude of Crowhurst in Carnac, Brittany, the sun rises in such a way that it forms a perfect 3, 4, 5 triangle within itself. So that is intriguing. And if you go like 50 miles south, it doesn't work. 50 miles north, it doesn't work. And so they were doing this thing that Howard calls astrogeometry. They were marking different latitudes and seeing what they could find with the geometry and with the solstices. And this is how they worked out the size and shape of the Earth, by the way. He also found this stunning summer solstice alignment going across the whole of southern Britain. It's not the St. Michael line. It's not the Michael line. You probably know about that, some of you. This is a different one. And it marks several sites that are actually aligned to the solstices themselves. And of course, we have Maes Howe. This is a remarkable site. This is in Orkney. This is, again, this goes back to a very early era, at least 3,500 BC. This is actually one of my kind of drone shots that I got during a beautiful sunrise or sunset, I can't remember now. But on the winter solstice sunset, the chamber, again, it's a megalithic chamber, it gets illuminated by a blade of light coming through a passageway and kind of taking over the whole site, and it's quite remarkable. But what's also interesting is that if you actually look on the horizon 20 days before and 20 days after the winter solstice, you have a double sunset occur on the hills of Hoy, which is another island where there's also a brilliant, amazing tomb called the Dwarfy Stane. And you can actually see here the two images from Victor Regis, who supplied these. And so they were marking not only a winter solstice sunrise alignment with this particular chamber, they were marking a double sunset, which is a very rare occurrence. Let's take it a bit older. Let's get older, but let's say stay in Scotland. This is a site called Warren Field in Aberdeenshire. This dates back 10,000 years, so it's at least 5,000 to 6,000 years older, 5,000 years older roughly than Maes Howe. And then what they found here was quite remarkable. This was only discovered, 15 or so years ago. And it was excavated by Vince Gaffney, who spoke at our Megalithomania conference recently. They call it a time reckoner. And what they did, they found a series of pits which would have had huge wooden poles placed in them in a slight curve, but they were all oriented to the winter solstice, apparently. This is what their research was telling them. And they found that not only were they studying the phases of the moon, they were using the winter solstice sunrise to reset the calendar every year so they could continue counting, and they knew where to count from. So this was happening 10,000 years ago. Not only the winter solstice, but also studying the phases of the moon. This stuff wasn't supposed to be happening back then. Let's jump over to South America again. We're going to just jump around a little bit, then I want to get into the really old stuff. This is Pumapunku. Now, I know some of you love this place. This is like, H blocks. This is remarkable high level of technology. I've been in many times myself. I've explored this site thoroughly, spent days, weeks there. But I've been working again with Kevin Esslinger, and we actually were part of an Ancient Aliens TV show for History Channel. And I got flown over to America. He created a full 3D model of Pumapunku from scratch with another researcher. And he found, because he was working on my Karahan Tepe, mine and JJ's Karahan Tepe alignment, he found what he thinks is like a solstice alignment based upon his reconstruction. So basically, he found that the sun rises in these 3 different positions. There's a summer solstice. And then in the middle, we have the equinox. And on the right, if it rises in the right, that's on the winter solstice. And so this is very, very intriguing. And he went into detail with this, and he reconstructed the whole thing, because Pumapunku was like a pyramid platform. That they had buildings on one end of it where all the kind of stones and ruins are. But what he found, which is even more interesting, is when the statues were repositioned where they were found, he found that the sun would come through the different alignments, through the different holes in the windows, basically, and the statue's face would get illuminated. And this is a statue of one of the Viracocha statues, by the rising sun at these different points of the year. So we're almost having a parallel with Karahan Tepe. Now, Pumapunku officially is only 2,000-3,000 years old at the most. It's been debated a lot. People say it's much, much older. It's been hit by cataclysm and everything else, but that's not the realm of this talk, so I'm not going to get into that now. We also have this site discovered in Brazil. It's called Brazilian Stonehenge. This is quite a large stone circle, basically. This is, if you walk down, through the Cornwall region, you would expect to find stone circles that look a bit like this, with holes in the stones and other such things. Now, the dating is from pottery. They only go between 500 and 2000 before present. And it was first discovered by a Swiss naturalist, Emil Galodi, in the 19th century, and rediscovered by local farmers in 1964, who accidentally obliterated about a third of the site, thinking it was just rocks, a rocky outcrop in his field. But this is made up of 127 blocks of granite, which is brought from somewhere else, they're not sure where. Some are 13 feet tall, some have holes carved through them. And what they found was, which fascinated me, is that one of the stones had a circular hole carved through it. I'm just reading this. During the winter solstice, the sun shines directly through the hole onto another rock for an extended amount of time. And this is from the main archaeologist at the site. She believes this was an astronomical calendar that they were working with in this remote part of coastal Brazil. This is actually in an area where the Atlantic goes into the Amazon. So this is a really interesting spot. It's almost like marking that particular part of the land and the sea. If we go back further, we've got Atlit Yam. This is a fascinating site. This is now submerged off the coast of Israel. This dates back to 7,400 BC to 6,000 BC. And here they found a semicircle of stones, a whole settlement, megaliths, avenues, cut marks as well, like we find at Göbekli Tepe. But what they found is that the main corridors that seem to be placed, stone corridors like walls, perfectly align to the summer solstice sunrise at 7,400 BC. And famous archaeoastronomer Clive Ruggles, he's like a proper academic, stated it was oriented in the direction of sunrise on the June solstice. So he confirmed it with his own research. Did you know that Jericho has a major summer solstice sunset alignment? Again, this is happening now. pretty much. This is really intriguing work by Rambakai and Roy Liren, who back in 2008 studied the movement of the sun in relationship to the stone tower, which dates to roughly 9,000 years ago. There's a huge settlement here. It's actually been thought to be older than this. And as the sun sets over the mountains in the background, the sun shines down the passageway, which is at an angle in the stone tower. This is the oldest stone tower on the planet, pretty much. And this is kind of what it looks like. I got access to the site very fortuitously, and no one else was there, and got down into the tower myself. So I managed to get some nice clean shot of it. And so again, and they've got this proven, they got this peer reviewed, and this was most definitely a summer solstice sunset alignment, and the whole interior of the structure would become illuminated and may have been used in some kind of summer solstice ritual. We also have Lipinski Veer, JJ looking awesome there. She went there last year, I think. She went and explored this remarkable site in the Carpathian Mountains of Serbia along the Danube River, which also is the border of Romania on the other side of the river. And this is one of the many sites situated in what is known as the Iron Gate Gorge, occupied from as far back as 9,800 BC. Now, multiple structures exist here. Some of them have very interesting geometries, and some of them go back to a much earlier era. But this is contemporary with the Taztepala culture, Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and they used not only geometries, they aligned stuff to the sun, which we'll have a look at, and these remarkable weird statues, not dissimilar to what you'd find in the Göbekli Tepe Museum, have been found there. But we can also see that they were working with very specific equilateral triangle geometry in all their homes. And these were measured as well, precise measurements. And they were doing this. They also found certain bone implements that had different notches, calendar carvings on them, and other such things. They found skeletons in a very strange position, almost like holding their navel, like we see at the Göbekli Tepe kind of T-pillars. And again, what we do find here, which is the most interesting aspect to me, is we find a double sunrise occurring on the sacred mountain on the other side of the river in Romania. And this was confirmed, this has been analyzed, this is Stellarium and other apps have been used to kind of determine that this worked in prehistory. And basically from Lipinski Veer, and all the structures, all the homes are oriented towards this mountain, the whole site. And on the summer solstice sunrise, you have a double sunrise, not a sunset, a double sunrise, a bit like at Maze Hale, but in the morning. And it would come up one side of the mountain, as you can see on the left, then it would reach the peak of the mountain as well. And so this, again, has been kind of analyzed, it's been peer-reviewed, and now people are realizing that many of these sites are aligning themselves to this particular time of the year. And there are other elements that link this with the Taztepala culture of Turkey. They use the solstice, hands on the navel, equilateral triangle geometry. They use terrazzo, which is lime mortar, superheated lime, up to 850 degrees, limestone. They have DNA connected with Anatolia, and it's clear that this is a spread of the Taztepala culture, without a doubt now. We have a site that goes even older than this. This features, again, an ancient apocalypse. I thank Graham for bringing this to our attention. This goes back to 13,200 years ago. And this is a rocky outcrop along the lower Amazon River at Monte Alegre. And there's a whole series of panels of rock art that was discovered and researched by Dr. Christopher Davis. And he found a prominent grid image, and he got kind of intrigued by that because it has 49 boxes with crosses in them. Basically, essentially, the crossed boxes are placed before the time of the winter solstice, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But during the few days of the solstice, the straight lines are then drawn in. Then after the solstice, the crosses are drawn in again, and the alignment is quite remarkable when it was analyzed. Let me just go back to the image. Yes, you can see, if you look on this one here, get to the right one. On the top right there, and the image on the right, that is what is called the sun catcher. And so the winter solstice sun would come through that during the time when the lines were drawn on the 49 grid box. 20 days or so before and 20 days after they were doing crosses. So they were using it as like a time reckoner, similar to what we saw at some of the other sites we've been looking at. And the whole analysis was done of this. It's peer-reviewed and everything else. So they were measuring the winter solstice in 13,200 years ago, which absolutely is just utterly astonishing. And Christopher Sean Davis, he said, the broad-reaching implication for early Americans is that through the strategic placement of rock art, these ancient artists fostered predictive archaeo-recording from which resources could be optimally extracted, ceremonial activities could be consistently scheduled, and gatherings for social and economic exchange could be more efficiently coordinated. Now, we're going to come on to the next section here, which fits in with this, going back to an even earlier epoch, where these solstices were being recorded going back possibly up to 40,000 years ago. And this is where we go to Upper Paleolithic Europe. This is an area around the whole Dordogne River in, I think, southwest France. And they have some remarkable, we know about Lascaux, we know about Chavet Caves and other such things. But one of the first bits of evidence that there was some astronomical significance to the Upper Paleolithic cave dwellers, the hunter-gatherers of that area, was put forward by Alexander Marshak in his book, The Roots of Civilization from 1972. And he found many bone plaques which displayed time-factored notation systems, many linked to lunar calendars. On the top there, we have the Tay plaque from the French site, and you can see all the notations, all the counting and everything else. We have the one on the bottom there is from Abry-Blanchard in France. This dates back to 30,000 BC, and it's said to represent the waxing and waning moon and eclipse patterns, which is very, very intriguing for its time. We also have this was found. This is 19,800 years old from Mazda Azil in France. And it was found that it has 72, if extended, there's only a segment of it, but if extended, it has 72 notches around the circumference. And this is a number of precession. So is this evidence that precession was being recorded by the Paleolithic people? It might not be. It might be a coincidence. But they were counting very specifically on these bone plaques. There's a huge hardback book, which you can still get copies of on Amazon, of Alexander Marshak's work, which is amazing if you get a chance to get a copy of that. And these are very similar to me of what has been found in the Tas-Tepala region. We have this at the very top of Karahan Tepe. We have this 6-foot wide series of what appears to be tally marks, all carved in. They look very similar to what we find on the bone plaques of ancient Europe, in the Paleolithic Europe. On the bottom there, we have a disc, like a limestone disc. It's only about this big, found at Sefer Tepe, and it has 13 dots in different configurations on both sides, which some people have suggested is a lunar symbol. And so what is going on here? Is this like a kind of influence from the Paleolithic people, possibly going into Tas-Tepala region? Who knows? Quite possibly. And also, this is an amazing article by Brian Hayden and Suzanne Villeneuve, which is well worth getting a copy of. I'll show you an image of it in a moment. But I'm going to quote a few words from this article because it absolutely stunned me. And they said the major use of calendars among complex hunter-gatherers was not for practical purposes such as scheduling hunts. Rather, the use of calendars was for setting ritual and feasting events. Now, we saw evidence of that also in this very ancient Brazilian Amazon rainforest site that we looked at just now. This is Lascaux Cave. This is probably the most famous Paleolithic cave in France. Goes back to around 17,000 years ago. And it was Martin Sweatman at this conference, the first ever conference, which I saw a recording of. I didn't attend it, unfortunately, where he just mentioned in this conference very briefly, and it's actually in his book as well, Prehistory Decoded, that Lascaux has a summer solstice sunset alignment. And I went, what? And so I looked into it. I found the papers. I looked into it and found, my God, it's not just Lascaux. We're talking possibly dozens, possibly even hundreds of these Paleolithic caves had alignments within them, as though they were chosen specifically because they were getting illuminated at these particular turnings of the year. been quite well known since like the 1950s and 60s that the symbolism in Lascaux is related to really the modern form of astronomical symbols, astrological symbols as well. Like the Pleiades, Taurus, and other such things. And these are inside the caves. They weren't like looking at the sky directly and then they were like recording it and then going in to paint it. But the thing about Lascaux, which really got me, is that not only do we have this kind of orientation of the main passageway leading from the outside to the interior of the cave, but actually at the summer solstice sunset, light would come in and illuminate, and this still happens now, illuminate some of the paintings on the cave, in the cave walls and ceilings themselves. So this means that they had an understanding of the position of the sun on the solstices 17,000 years ago. And some research was done by a French researcher who went there in December 1999 and found that the full moon during the opposite side, during the winter solstice period, opposite side of the year, would do what it does at Karahan Tepe. It would illuminate this interior part of the cave and the paintings within them, like we find at Karahan Tepe and the porthole stone and the stone head. We have Shavat Cave here. This is one of the most famous caves. It's got beautiful handprints of children, everything within it. Just wanted to show you that because there's some cool imagery. But the data obtained by the researchers in France indicate that the entrance orientations of decorated caves and rock shelters in that region cluster towards the rising or setting positions of the sun at the solstices. And we're talking not just roughly, we're talking very accurately. And you can see the data here. I've highlighted the orange, that's the winter solstice sunrise, and the blue, the summer solstice sunset, just to sort of, because these are the main ones we're looking at. But this is astonishing. And they found that of 130 caves that were studied, 122 of them aligned to the solstices or the equinoxes. Now that is very well chosen caves. There must be a lot of caves to choose from in that area. And you can really compare this to Neolithic and Bronze Age megalithic sites, the way they align themselves to the solstices. So they were doing this at such an early period. It's unbelievable. This is a map I adapted from the French researchers' work, sort of translated it into English. I do a lot of translation to get all this information for you. But you can see that there's all these caves here, and with all the entrances aligned to these different times of year. So this is a valid, scientifically tested phenomena, which has now been proven to exist beyond any doubt. We have the Abri Castanet rock shelter, this is 37,000 years old, and Bison Cave, 33,000 years old, are illuminated during the winter solstice sunset. We have Lascaux and Benefil caves on the summer solstice sunset. We have Blanchard and Combarelli's Cave 1 on the equinoxes, although a majority of the caves are aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. And we have here a view of one of the caves in that region. An artist did that for the researchers. And also a bison or a bull carved on one of the stone plaques found at the site. Furthermore, the stunning 3D relief carvings of the Venus of La Salle on the right there from the same area is in a cave that again orients to the winter solstice sunrise. And also we have this strange horn with 13 lines carved on it, which some people say is a solar symbol. We have also fertility kind of carvings here. The dude on the left looks pretty excited from the same era. And we get this also at Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe with the same fertility symbolism. In fact, JJ and I have written an extensive article about that, giggling aside. But this goes further. I mean, I could just reel off 122 examples here, but I won't. Okay, so in 1892, the L'Abri de Poisson, shelter of the fish, was discovered on the banks of the Vaziri River and in the Dodoin area. And they found this very interesting fish carving of a salmon, which is 1 meter long panel, 3.2 feet, engraved on the ceiling. And it has its lower jaw strangely pulled back, and no one really understood why there was this anomaly. And then it was realized by some other researchers that this is a unique characteristic of what happens to male salmon in the breeding season, which takes place towards the end of December. And so this again, and it's aligned, the entrance to the winter solstice sunrise. So they're not only aligning or choosing caves that have these alignments, they're also marking nature occurring and what it does at this time as well. And if you really want to get into it, this is the article, this is the paper you want to look at. It came out in 2011. Now, through this, there's earlier research, which some of this comes from as well. But what they did here, which really got me, they took a look at ethnological studies of hunter-gatherer groups from around the world and their relationship to the sky, and applied that to the Upper Paleolithic cave people and the paintings and the alignments there. And they came up with some remarkable results. Now, you must remember, this is hunter-gatherer groups from around the world at that time, and, you know, from a relatively recent times, but they have the same traditions that go back many thousands of years. And this can also apply to the Tepela people of ancient southeast Anatolia. She found that in all of the 63 groups, it was the winter solstice that appeared to have played an important role in terms of celestial observations. It should be emphasized that in our ethnographic sample, the mention of solstice observances generally involve careful and accurate monitoring of solar rising setting positions by specialists using tree, post, or rock alignments viewed from special locations. That sounds like you could apply that to Karahan Tepe or Göbekli Tepe as well. They looked at many Native American traditions as well, of what people like the Chumash were doing in Southern California, where they had a secret society within this culture called the Antap. The highest ranking position was the sun priest, who was also the head astronomer, who maintained careful observations, and he would keep his paraphernalia within the cave, and he would go in there at the solstices and carry out initiations and rituals and other such things, specifically focused on the solstices and caves. And often they had paintings, ochre paintings in them, where the sun would align to and shine upon. And there's generally a whole old tradition of many different Native American cultures that I looked at, mainly through the work of Vine Deloria Jr. and others, of solstice monitoring. And through all these different tribes and cultures, they were often referred to as the shaman or the ritual specialist, the sun priest, the old men, the wise old men, calendar experts, calendar keepers, or official elders. I like the sound of all of those. They sound very, very cool people. And this is another quote I want to read out. It's quite intriguing. As we have seen, astronomical and calendrical knowledge, at least at the level of detailed solstice monitoring, was a recurring feature in many complex hunter-gatherer groups, and continued to be a major feature in more groups, and continued to be a major feature in more complex societies from the dawn of agriculture to the first high civilization. You could again just be talking about the builders of Karahan Tepe, in my opinion. Which brings us back to this remarkable site and the winter solstice there. Now, this is essentially what we've been looking at in the Paleolithic caves, could be a legacy that continued to the time of the Tepela people of southeast Anatolia. And I think that could be the case, and I think this time of year was important on so many levels, not just for rituals, not just for feasting, not just for developing calendars, but sacred meanings, initiations, rites of passage, and things like this. You can just imagine the astronomer priests of Karahan Tepe seated on the western edge of the main enclosure, and only the sun priest and privileged visitors would be allowed to go into the pillar shrine to observe the movement of the blade of light across the face on winter solstice morning. It may have also been covered, creating a cave-like environment. And I believe this is what was happening in the Tepela super civilization of southeast Turkey, where feasting and ceremonial activity are thought to have occurred there in the archaeological layers and where they have been discovered. The hunting of gazelles, for instance, takes place at the end of summer going into the autumn, and feasting would take place towards the time of the winter solstice, much like we find at Durrington Walls in the Stonehenge landscape. Again, what we've just looked at with the Paleolithic and super ancient solstices, that is part of the talk. You can read in another article I've published on academia.org, scrib.com. It's going to be in the upcoming book as well. But I want to relate this more closely to a concerning issue which is happening at Göbekli Tepe and other sites in that region. Because a paper was published by Dr. Lee Clare, this is him with JJ, a couple of years ago. He's like the head archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe. And he believes in a paper that he wrote, which has now become almost like Wikipedia friendly, that there were 3 types of charismatic leaders at Göbekli Tepe: the ritual adept, the storyteller, and the hunter. The ritual adepts were essential to the community. They were head of scheduling ceremonies, initiations, and rituals, and therefore, I believe, must have been involved in recording time. They also acted as a connection between this world and the world of the ancestors, like shamans. However, in Lee Clare's hypothesis, there is no mention of any form of astronomy or solstices or anything, or the fact that anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer groups routinely had connections to the solstices, even though he knows about the winter solstice at Karahan Tepe. This is partly due to the misleading roof hypothesis that we outlined earlier, where Neshmi Karal, the head excavator at Karahan Tepe, and Lee Clare state that they had no roofs, so no astronomy in any way took place there, which appears, I believe, to be suppressing and deliberately sidelining all this research we've been looking at. So we're also concerned because the new roof does not account for any of this. So any alignments such as the winter solstice alignment is not going to be considered when it's being built. We hope, though, a notable gap will be left in the new covering and future generations can appreciate this winter solstice phenomenon, because we believe this is something special that can be treated with reverence to the ancient people of this part of southeast Turkey. But I'm sure more discoveries like the ones discussed in this talk will come to light. But for now, these examples of solar alignments of this extremely early era certainly suggests that the builders of Karahan Tepe were part of a long legacy of very capable and very intelligent hunter-gatherers who had a tremendous understanding of the movements of the sun. Observing and studying the sky played a significant role in the mindset and cultural advancements of the Taz-Tepeler people. But it was these hunter-gatherer groups before the pre-pottery Neolithic era across the Upper Paleolithic world who originally developed a substantial understanding of these solstices long before the agricultural revolution, and their insights and ingenuity are still being celebrated today. And we really do feel that the solstice discovery could integrate something important culturally for the current population of the region and the world. And wouldn't it be good for tourism if they accepted this winter solstice alignment so people could go there and appreciate it, much like their ancestors did? As with Newgrange, for instance, they could limit numbers to view it over several days, and people, do a raffle to get tickets. Or they could open it up freely to the public, just like at Stonehenge, where our story began. So thank you very much, everybody. Happy solstice. If there's time.
Yeah, we've got just a little time. Okay, so we are officially entering right now our intermission. But if there are any questions for Mr. Newman, we could take a few of those. Do we have questions? I do see a couple. Okay, let's get a microphone for those.
Sure, okay. Can I keep talking?
Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Yes. So were any of the T-pillars still standing, and if so, could they be dated using optically stimulated luminescence?
They probably could be, yeah. I don't see why they shouldn't be. I mean, the fact is they've gone down to the bedrock and they've excavated, they found ash and charcoal from the very lowest levels to the bedrock and dated that. So we believe it's pretty tight, the dating. I mean, the original people who did it were sort of very serious German archaeologists, so they don't mess about.
Okay, thank you.
Any others, or are we going to get our cups of tea now? I want one. Someone get me tea.
Hi, thanks. I have a question about the weathering on all of the stones. They look, they've been covered for 12,000 years now. Is the weathering effect of the stones, has that happened while they've been covered, or do you think they were weathered like that before they were covered 12,000 years ago?
The only weathering on the stones is the ones that were left out, basically. The very tops of the T-pillars were like sticking out of the ground because all these sites were buried at the end of their use, like 9,000 years ago. And so most of them were buried and preserved. But we've got to remember, they were in use for 1,500 years, so there would have been weathering during their use. Yeah. But mainly they were preserved. But there was deliberate destruction of Karahan Tepe at the end of its use, like a decommissioning of the site, and then it was buried. And so there's different variations for that answer. But yes, the one you can see where it's been weathered, because it's limestone. So it would be very badly weathered if it was left out to the elements. So in a way, I'm really glad they were buried because it preserved them.
Yeah. So that was the condition some of those were in, because like you said, they were in use for so long that they actually were weathered like that before they were ever covered up? For the
Some
most
of them,
part?
yeah. A little bit of weathering, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
I think it's time for a break. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your break, and we're going to be back soon for Robert Schock.